Hospital corridors always seemed the same to me. White walls, the pungent smell of antiseptic, and that oppressive feeling of anxiety that you can't escape. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair for the third hour, occasionally glancing at the red-lighted operating room sign. Time seemed to stop. Nurses walked by, paying no attention to me, just another anxious relative in this endless hallway. I tried to distract myself by examining my hands. On my ring finger, a wedding ring glittered dimly, the exact same one I'd put on Audrey's finger 5 years ago. 5 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday, and sometimes it felt like it had been forever. I pulled out my phone, opened up the gallery. Here's our first picture together, Audrey at the piano at the music college where she teaches. Her slender fingers are frozen over the keys, and a slight smile plays on her lips. I remember walking into her class back then to discuss buying an apartment. Who would have thought that a routine real estate transaction would lead to a wedding? The phone vibrated. It was Vince calling. "How is she?" His friend's voice sounded concerned. "Still in surgery. It's the third hour." "Hang in there, man. Reed and I can come over if we need to." "No thanks. Just sit with the paperwork in the office. They're supposed to call today about the house on Westwood Street." "To hell with the house, Graham. We don't have time for that right now." I smiled weakly. Vince had always been like that, willing to drop everything for his friends. We'd met in college, and when I'd opened my real estate agency, he'd been the first to come work for me. Now he was my head sales manager, and I couldn't have wished for anything better. Closing my eyes, I remembered the events of the previous evening. Audrey and I were cooking dinner, or rather, I was cooking, and she was sitting on the kitchen counter, chattering her legs and talking about her students. She was wearing her favorite homemade dress in small florals, her hair gathered in a careless bun. Just an ordinary Thursday night. "Jessica's finally getting Chopin," she said as she watched me chop vegetables for the salad. "Can you believe it? 3 months of work and—" She didn't finish the sentence. I turned around and saw her go pale, clutching her stomach. "Honey? Something. I don't feel good." Her voice shook. I remember the next few minutes like a blur. The call to the ambulance, Audrey writhing in pain on the couch, paramedics asking about symptoms, a trip to the hospital, where we were immediately met by a team of doctors. "Acute appendicitis requires emergency surgery," Dr. Morrison said, reviewing the exam results. "Mr. McAllister, you'll have to wait here." And so I wait. In my pocket is an unread book, a detective book I bought at the airport on my last business trip to Dallas. But right now, I can't concentrate on reading. Instead, my brain is replaying memories like an old movie. Here's Audrey and I moving into our first apartment, a small studio in the Midtown neighborhood. I remember assembling IKEA furniture, arguing over the color of the curtains, and rejoicing like children when we finally hung our first painting on the wall. At that time, my agency was just starting to work, and money was tight, but we were happy. Then we moved to a better neighborhood, a 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the park. Audrey set up one of the rooms as a music class, where her first private students came. In the evenings, the sounds of the piano could be heard from behind the door. She was preparing for lessons, practicing. Sometimes I just stood and listened to her play Debussy or Rachmaninoff and thought how lucky I was. A nurse walked by with a clipboard and I perked up. "I'm sorry, do you know how long it's going to be?" "The surgery is coming to an end, Mr. McAllister. The doctor will be out to see you shortly." I nodded and pulled out my phone again. A few unread messages from Reed. He'd sent pictures of some paperwork for work. Reed handled our website and the whole technical side of the business. I'd met him through Vince 3 years ago, and since then we'd become friends, not just colleagues. There was another message from Lauren, Audrey's college colleague. "Just found out. How is she? Call me when you have news." Lauren was a vocal coach and often came to visit us. She and Audrey could talk for hours about music, their students, and the latest happenings in the classical arts world while Vince and I grilled meat in the backyard. A gurney appeared in the hallway with some kind of patient, and my heart flinched, but it was an elderly woman. I looked at the clock, almost midnight. My stomach rumbled. I remembered I hadn't had dinner. On the kitchen table were leftover uncut vegetables and marinated steak meat. A normal Thursday night that had suddenly turned into an endless wait in the hospital hallway. I remembered how Audrey had complained of a slight malaise that morning, but had put it down to fatigue the end of the semester, a lot of work with students. Maybe I should have insisted on seeing a doctor. Maybe then we would have had time to prevent. The red light above the operating room went out. The doors opened and Dr. Morrison stepped out, removing his mask. "Mr. McAllister?" I jumped up from my chair, feeling my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. The surgery was a success. The appendix was removed in time, no complications. Your wife will need a few days in the hospital for observation, but the prognosis is favorable. Relief came over me like a wave. I sat back in my chair, feeling my knees shake. When can I see her?" "They're moving her to the ward now. She's still under anesthesia, so she may be disoriented. You can come in half an hour, but not for long." I nodded, watching the doctor walk away down the hall. I pulled out my phone to text my friends, but my fingers wouldn't listen. 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, and I'll see Audrey. Tell her I'm okay, that I'm here for her, that the worst is over. The hospital room seemed unnaturally quiet after the noisy hallway. Audrey lay on the narrow bed, tangled in the IV wires, so small and defenseless in her oversized hospital shirt. Her blonde hair was strewn across the pillow, and her face was pale, almost blending in with the white linens. I crouched carefully on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb her sleep. Dawn was breaking outside the window, the first rays of sunlight painting the walls of the room a pale pink. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled hum of the waking city could be heard. There was a glass of water on the nightstand and a stack of paper napkins. I absently adjusted them, smoothing the stack. The monitor next to me beeped, counting Audrey's heartbeat. The measured beep beep was soothing, confirming that all was well. The nurse, a full middle-aged woman with a kind face, peered into the room. "How is she?" I whispered. "Should be waking up soon. The anesthesia is wearing off. Just don't worry if she says weird things. It's normal." I nodded, remembering waking up myself after a wisdom tooth extraction 2 years ago. Audrey had videotaped my incoherent monologue about why penguins don't fly back then, and we'd laughed for a long time rewatching the tape. Audrey moved, her eyelashes fluttering. I took her hand, so cold and lifeless now. "Honey, can you hear me?" She slowly opened her eyes, her gaze unfocused. Graham?" Her voice sounded hoarse. "Yes, I'm here. It's okay. The surgery was a success." She tried to sit up, but I gently held her back. "Shh, you need to lie down." "What time is it?" "It's almost 6 in the morning. You've only slept a couple hours." She closed her eyes again, and I thought she had fallen asleep. But after a minute, she spoke, in a strange, detached voice, not at all like her usual one. "I don't deserve you, Graham." "What are you saying? It's the anesthesia talking in you." "No, I'm so bad. I have to confess." Something in her tone made me wary. My heart hammered more frequently. "Confess what, sweetheart?" "It. I've been seeing him for 3 months now. I'm sorry." The room felt like it tilted. I stared at her face, so calm now, and tried to comprehend what I was hearing. "Who are you seeing?" "With Keith. He understands music. Like me. We were practicing a duet, and then..." Her voice grew quieter and quieter, turning into an unintelligible mumble. I sat there, stunned, as the monitor continued to count down the beats of her heart. Kit. That name reminded me of something vaguely. I think she'd mentioned him, a music theory professor, recently transferred from another college. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It just happened." Her fingers squeezed my hand weakly. I stared at our intertwined fingers, her small palm in my large one, and felt something dark and cold growing inside. The nurse peeked into the room again. "How is she?" "Seems delirious." My voice sounded strange, like a stranger's. "That's normal. Anesthesia often causes strange reactions. Don't take what she's saying right now to heart." But how not to take it? How to forget those words spoken with such piercing sincerity? Audrey fell back into sleep. I looked at her face, so familiar and suddenly so alien. I thought back to the last 3 months. Were there signs? Something I should have noticed? She started staying late at college more often. Extra classes, rehearsals, concert prep. I didn't think much of it. End of the semester, lots of work. Now every memory was colored with new, bitter tones. Her new cell phone, with a passcode, lying screen down. Just concerned about student privacy, she'd said then. I believed it. A new habit of locking herself in the bathroom with her phone. I like to read before bed, she explained. How could I have doubted it? Increased meetings with coworkers, new perfume, the absent-mindedness at dinner. It was all adding up to a mosaic I didn't want to see. It was finally dawning outside the window. I pulled out my phone, a few missed calls from Vince, a text from Reed. Work was waiting, but I couldn't bring myself to think about business. The nurse brought in an IV. You should go home, get some rest. She'll sleep for a few more hours. I shook my head. I'll stay. Suit yourself, but at least go to the cafeteria, get something to eat. I didn't feel hungry. There was only emptiness inside and this growing dark feeling. I stared at the sleeping Audrey and tried to connect the two images. My wife, with whom we'd shared a life for 5 years, and this stranger confessing adultery in a drug-induced delirium. Maybe it's really just a delusion, a drugged imagination? But then why did that confession sound so true? I remembered the last time we'd had dinner together at a restaurant, a week ago. She'd been distracted, barely listening to me talk about my new project. And then her phone rang and she smiled as she read the message. From who? I asked then. Oh, it's Lauren, about the schedule, she replied, tucking her phone into her purse. Lauren. I pulled out my phone, finding her message. Maybe I should ask? No, it's too early. I need to talk to Audrey first. When she's awake, when the anesthesia wears off. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. The morning shift had begun. A door slammed somewhere, a murmur of voices. The hospital was waking up, starting a new day. Audrey mumbled something in her sleep, her hand twitching, catching the IV. I adjusted the tube, trying not to wake her. The bruise from the injection was visible on her wrist, so bright against her pale skin. How many more bruises are there on her soul? How many lies lurked behind the familiar daily routine? The nurse peeked into the room again. Mr. McAllister, the doctor wants to talk to you. I stood up, feeling my legs stiffen. I took one last look at Audrey, who was asleep, and walked out into the hallway. The morning light flooded the hospital walls, but it felt like darkness was thickening around me. The door to our apartment opened with the familiar creak. I held Audrey's elbow as she slowly crossed the threshold. 3 days in the hospital seemed to have aged her 10 years. She moved cautiously, like a frail old woman. Careful, there's a threshold, I warned as I helped her into the living room. She nodded silently. She had become very silent in general over the past few days. Maybe the medication was still working. Or maybe... I pushed the unwanted thoughts away. The air in the apartment smelled stale. I hadn't been home much these days, just running in to change clothes and grab what I needed. The kitchen table was still littered with uncut vegetables from the night before, weathered, blackened. An unwashed coffee cup stood in the sink. Do you want to lie down? I asked, helping Audrey to sit on the couch. Yeah, I guess. She wrinkled her nose, making herself comfortable. Can you get some water? I went into the kitchen, pulling out a glass. My hands shook, and the water spilled onto the countertop. 3 days. 3 days I waited for her to talk about that confession. Explain it. Refute it. Say something. But she didn't say anything, and I couldn't find the strength to ask, When I returned to the living room, I found Audrey with her phone in her hands. She'd quickly put its screen down when I walked in. My heart clenched painfully. Here you go. Do you need anything else? No, thanks. Why don't you put on some music? Something calm. I walked over to the stereo. On the shelf were her favorite records, classical, jazz, some modern music. I chose Debussy's Moonlight, her favorite piece. She used to play it often on the piano in music class. The music filled the room. Audrey closed her eyes, her face relaxing a little. I sat in the chair across from her, watching her. So familiar and so alien at the same time. My phone rang. Vince. Sorry, I said to Audrey and walked out into the hallway. How is she? My friend's voice sounded concerned. Just brought her home. Weak still. Listen, there's a problem with the house on Westwood Street. The buyers are demanding an additional inspection. Vince, I can't right now. A pause. Is something wrong? No. I mean, let's talk later. I walked back into the living room. Audrey was dozing to the music, her breasts rising and falling measuredly. Her cell phone lay on the coffee table. No, I won't do it. Not yet. The day dragged on slowly. I cooked chicken broth according to my mother's recipe, checking on Audrey periodically. She was snoozing, or reading a magazine, or just staring out the window. Her phone rang a few times, but she didn't pick up. Who is it? I asked casually, stirring the broth. Hey, colleagues, I guess. Concerned. Her voice sounded indifferent, but her fingers nervously rubbed the edge of the plaid. By late afternoon, Lauren came in with fruit and fresh magazines. I'd left the two of them alone, citing work, but really I just couldn't be around them. Their soft conversation carried into my office, but I couldn't make out the words. When Lauren left, I noticed Audrey was crying. Is something wrong? No, nothing. Just tired. During the night, I hardly slept at all, lying next to her in our bedroom, listening to her breathing and thinking back over every day of the last 3 months, trying to find the moment when everything changed. When did she start to drift away? When did this Keith guy come into our lives? I woke up this morning to the sound of an incoming text message. Audrey was asleep, her phone vibrating quietly on the nightstand. The screen lit up, showing the beginning of the message. Get well, No continuation was visible. The sender was labeled simply with a K. I got up, trying not to make any noise, and went into the kitchen. I mechanically brewed some coffee, took yesterday's broth out of the refrigerator. Scraps of phrases from her confession kept rolling around in my head. It's been 3 months. He understands music. Just happened. Reed called. Hey, man. How's it going? All right. I tried to put some pep in my voice. You sure? Vince said you've been kind of weird the last few days. I was quiet for a moment. Reed was not only my IT guy, but also a good friend. Maybe I should tell him? Listen, can you track the correspondence on your phone? What do you mean? Whose correspondence? Never mind, forget it. Graham, what's going on? Nothing, really. I gotta go. Audrey's waking up. I hung up the phone and went back into the bedroom. Audrey was indeed awake and was trying to sit up. Careful, let me help you up. Thanks. What time is it? It's almost 9. Want some broth? She nodded, avoiding looking me in the eye. I helped her to the kitchen, sat her down at the table. She looked pale in the morning light, shadows lingering under her eyes. Do you need anything from college? I could drive over, get some sheet music or… No! She answered too quickly, too sharply. I mean, don't. Lauren will bring everything. I heated up the broth, watching her eat slowly, holding the spoon with a slightly trembling hand. The bruise from the IV was still visible on her wrist. We were silent. This silence hung between us like a heavy curtain. The day dragged on, similar to the previous day. I worked remotely, occasionally checking email and answering calls. Audrey slept more, read occasionally, hardly spoke at all. Her phone continued to vibrate periodically. Toward evening, Vince came in, ostensibly for work, but I knew he was worried. We sat in my office discussing agency business, but I could feel his attentive gaze. You don't seem yourself, he said finally. Did something happen at the hospital? I shook my head. Nothing's wrong. Just tired. Graham, I've known you for 10 years. You're a lousy liar. I looked at him, opened my mouth, and closed it. No, not yet. I have to talk to her first. Gotta hear the truth from her lips. Not in delirium, not under anesthesia. When Vince left, I found Audrey in tears on the couch. What happened? Nothing. Just, my stitch hurts. She quickly wiped her eyes, but I managed to spot the phone in her hand. Another text message? From who? Should I call the doctor? No, it's fine. Really, really, what a strange word. What's left of truth in our lives anyway? At night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to Audrey stirring next to me. Her breathing was ragged. She wasn't asleep either. What was she thinking about? About whom? A clock ticked in the darkness, counting down the minutes of sleeplessness. Outside the window, the night city rumbled, and between us grew a wall of silence, of reticence, of suspicion. I must ask. I must know the truth. But every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. Because sometimes not knowing is better than the truth. Sometimes a lie is more merciful than the truth. But it couldn't go on like this for long. Something had to happen. Something had to break. The morning began with rain. The drops drummed on the eaves, creating a monotonous background noise. I sat in the kitchen, mechanically stirring the long cold coffee. Audrey was still asleep. She'd been sleeping a lot the last few days, as if trying to hide from reality in dreams. Her cell phone lay on the table. She had taken a sleeping pill last night and left it in the kitchen when she came in for a drink of water. The screen lit up intermittently with incoming messages. I stared at it as if hypnotized. Just one move and I would know the truth. But I couldn't. Not like this. The front door creaked softly. Audrey came out of the bedroom, bundled up in her favorite robe. "Good morning." Her voice sounded hoarse from sleep. "Morning! How did you sleep?" "Fine. What are you doing up so early?" I shrugged. I couldn't say I'd barely slept at all, running the same question through my head. She reached for her phone, and I noticed her hand trembling. Quickly unlocking the screen, she scrolled through the messages. Her face changed for a moment. What was it? Relief? Anxiety? "You want breakfast?" I asked, standing up. "Just coffee, I guess." I pulled out her favorite cup, white with a gold border, a wedding present from my parents. For 5 years, we drank coffee out of that cup in the morning. 5 years of sharing breakfast, conversations, life. "Audrey." "Yes?" She looked up from the phone. "We need to talk." She froze. Thunder rumbled outside the window. A storm was coming. "About what?" "About what you said at the hospital, after the surgery." The cup in her hands trembled slightly. "What I said? You don't remember?" She shook her head. "I don't remember that time well. The anesthesia, the drugs. You were talking about Keith." The sound of a cup shattering cut the silence. Coffee spilled over the white tile in a dark puddle. "Careful." I reached for a towel. "You'll cut yourself." "I'm sorry. I'm so embarrassing." Her hands shook as she tried to pick up the splinters. "Leave it. I'll clean it up. Sit down." She lowered herself into a chair, avoiding my gaze. "So what about Keith?" "I don't know what you mean." "Really? Then why are you going pale?" "Graham, I'm just weak from the surgery." I wiped the floor, threw the shards away. Every movement was a struggle. I was seething inside. "You admitted you've been seeing him for 3 months." "What?" She tried to laugh, but it came out fake. "That's absurd. You said he understood music, that everything just happened." "I was under anesthesia. You can't seriously—" "And the messages? The ones signed with a K?" She turned even paler. "Did you read my messages?" "No, but I saw the notifications." Outside the window, it thundered again. The rain intensified, turning into a downpour. "It's just work stuff." Her voice sounded almost calm. "We're preparing a joint performance." "You sounded different at the hospital." "I wasn't myself. You heard the nurse. It's normal to say weird things after anesthesia." She stood up, staggered. I instinctively reached out a hand to support her, but she pulled away. "Graham, listen. I love you. Only you. How can you doubt that?" There were tears in her eyes, real or pretend. "Then why have you changed? Why do you hide your phone? Why do you cry when you think I can't see?" "I've had surgery. I'm weak, tired, on medication. And instead of supporting me, you accuse me of something I don't understand." Her voice trailed off. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. I stood there, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to hug her, to comfort her, to believe her. The other part remembered the sincerity of her confession in the hospital. "Just tell the truth." My voice sounded muffled. "I'm telling the truth. Why don't you believe me?" "Because something has changed. You've changed." "Nothing has changed. It's all in your head." She stood up, staggered toward the bedroom. "Where are you going?" "I need to lie down. I'm dizzy." I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the wet coffee trail on the floor. My phone vibrated in my pocket. "Vince." "Yeah? Are you okay? Your voice sounds weird." "No, I'm not okay." A pause. "Shall I come over?" "Not right now, I'll tell you later." Muffled sobs came from the bedroom. I sat down at the table, wrapping my arms around my head. What was true? Her drunken sincerity in the hospital, or today's tears? Her confession or denial? The phone vibrated again, this time hers. The screen popped up. "Kay." I watched the message fade away, taking with it a piece of the truth I so wanted to know. Everything went quiet in the bedroom. I walked to the door. Audrey was lying curled up, facing the wall. There was a cell phone lying on the pillow next to her. "Audrey." She didn't answer. She was either asleep or pretending to be. I went back into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker. The mechanical action helped me not to think. Take out the cup, pour in the coffee, fill it with water. But the thoughts came back. Over and over I replayed her words in the hospital in my head, her denials today, her tears. Which of those things were real? Outside the window, the rain continued to pour. Somewhere in the bedroom, my wife was crying quietly, and I stood in the kitchen, holding a cup of cooling coffee, and felt my world crumbling. The phone vibrated again, this time a message from Reed. "If you need to talk, I'm here." I stared at the screen, not knowing what to say back. How to tell a friend that your life had been built on lies? How to explain this pain, this distrust, this doubt? The bed creaked in the bedroom. I heard footsteps, then the sound of the bathroom closing. A moment later, a muffled voice. She was on the phone. I could have come to the door. I could have eavesdropped. But instead, I stepped out onto the balcony, into the rain. Cold drops ran down my face, mixing with something salty. Tears? I couldn't remember the last time I'd cried. The phone vibrated in my pocket again. Vince wouldn't give up. "Dude, I'm coming to see you." "Don't," I texted back. "Not yet." I had to handle this on my own. I had to find out the truth. Whatever it was. The thunderstorm slowly subsided. Audrey's voice faded into the bathroom. There was silence, heavy, suffocating, filled with unspoken words and bitter suspicions. A week passed. Audrey was getting worse, complaining of pain, hardly eating. I watched her grow paler every day, losing strength. After our conversation, we hardly spoke to each other. We exchanged only the necessary phrases, as if we were strangers forced to live under the same roof. That morning I awoke to her moaning. She was lying there, curled up, pressing her hands to her stomach. "What's wrong?" "It hurts. Really hurts." Sweat covered her forehead, her lips turning white. "Calling an ambulance." This time it was all a blur. The hospital again, the anxious doctors again, the endless waiting corridor again. Only now I sat there with a heavy weight of suspicion and unspoken accusations. Dr. Morrison appeared 2 hours later. "Inflammation. Probably didn't clear up completely during the first surgery. We'll have to do a second one." I nodded, mechanically signing some papers. One thought was going through my mind. Maybe under anesthesia she would tell the truth again? The nurse, the same full woman with the kind face, brought me a glass of water. "Don't worry so much, Mr. McAllister. Everything will be fine." I pulled out my phone. A few missed calls from Vince, a text from Reed. Work was standing still. I hadn't been able to focus on business the last few days. Missed out on a big deal yesterday, but I didn't care. "Mr. McAllister?" I looked up. A young nurse stood in front of me. "Your wife is asking for the phone. She says we need to cancel classes. I'll call the college myself." "No," she insists. I pulled her phone out of my pocket. It had been there since I'd left for the hospital in a hurry. The screen flashed. 3 missed calls from Kay. My hands shook as I handed the phone to the nurse. My mind throbbed. Why is she so insistent? Who does she really want to call? Time stretched interminably slow. I walked down the hallway, counting my steps, trying not to think. 60 steps there, 60 steps back. A monotonous motion that helped keep me from going insane. Graham? I turned around. Lauren was standing at the end of the hallway, in an elegant gray suit, with a folder of sheet music under her arm. What's wrong? I got a call from the college. Surgery again. Inflammation. She crouched down next to me, put a hand on my shoulder. It's going to be okay. Audrey's strong. Strong, I thought. Strong enough to live a double life? Lauren. Yeah? I wanted to ask about Keith, about whether she'd noticed anything, but the words stuck in my throat. Thanks for coming over. She looked at me strangely, like she wanted to say something but changed her mind. Half an hour later, she left. She had class. The day stretched on interminably. I tried to work on my laptop, but I couldn't concentrate. The letters blurred in front of my eyes. My thoughts kept returning to Audrey, to her confession, to her denial. Toward evening, an unfamiliar man appeared in the hallway. Tall, well-dressed, with a folder of notes under his arm, just like Lauren's. He walked confidently down the hallway, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Something in his gait, in his appearance, made me tense. He stopped at the nurse's desk, asking something. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw the nurse point toward Audrey's room. The man headed toward the room. Everything went cold inside. I knew who it was, even though I had never seen him. He entered the room. After a minute, I heard muffled voices. Standing up, I walked closer. Why did you come? I had to make sure. Go away. Please leave. I froze at the door. Audrey's voice sounded strange, frightened, and at the same time, tender. I've been worried. You haven't been answering messages. Keith, please. Keith. So that's him. The music theory professor. The man with whom my wife... The door opened. He came out, tall, stately, about 35 years old. Our eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, then something like guilt. He quickly averted his gaze and hurried toward the exit. I stood there, unable to move. In the room, Audrey was crying. Mr. McAllister? A nurse touched my shoulder. Surgery's in an hour. We need to prep your wife. I nodded, mechanically backing away from the door. My head was buzzing. So this is what the man who ruined my life looks like. This is who gets messages signed with a K. The phone vibrated. Vince. I'm downstairs. Come down. I can't. Surgery's coming up. 5 minutes. You need to get some air. I went downstairs. Vince was waiting at the entrance, holding out a cup of coffee. What's going on, Graham? And don't say nothing. I looked at the passing cars, the people rushing somewhere. Normal life went on while mine fell apart. I saw him. Who? Her lover. Vince choked on his coffee. What? I told him everything. The confession at the hospital, the texts, the meeting today. The words came pouring out. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Are you sure? Maybe it's really just a coworker? You didn't hear her voice when she asked him to leave. Didn't see her crying afterward. Vince was silent, twirling the empty cup in his hands. What are you going to do? I don't know. We need to get her well first. And then? I shook my head. Then we'll see. When I returned upstairs, I found Audrey already prepped for surgery. She was lying pale with her eyes closed. Where have you been? Her voice sounded weak. Out getting coffee. I thought... She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I knew she was thinking about seeing him again. They'll be taking you to surgery soon, the nurse said. Would you like some privacy? I nodded. As the door closed, Audrey opened her eyes. Graham. Don't. Not now. But I have to explain. Later, when you're well. She closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. I'm sorry. For what? For the truth under anesthesia or for lying after? She didn't answer. A minute later, the orderlies came in to take her to the operating room. Once again, I was alone in the hallway. Only now it was different. Now I knew what the man who had stolen my wife looked like. I knew his name. I saw him leave in a hurry, caught red-handed. The phone in my pocket was silent. My soul was empty and dark. The sun was setting outside the window, painting the walls of the corridor blood red. I sat and waited, waiting for the surgery to be over, waiting for Audrey to wake up, waiting for the truth that might come out again in a drug-induced delirium. But most of all, I waited for the moment when I could meet him face to face. The man whose name my wife spoke so fondly. The man who had come to visit her despite the risk of meeting me. Keith. After the second surgery, Audrey recovered more quickly. She was discharged 3 days later and went back to work at the college. Our apartment became a silent battleground. We existed side by side, barely speaking, avoiding meeting each other's eyes. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. It was barely light outside the window. Audrey was still asleep. Her breathing was even, calm. I looked at her face, so serene in her sleep, and wondered if she was dreaming about him. The kitchen was cool. I brewed coffee mechanically, watching the city waking up outside the window. A coffee shop was opening across the street from our house, a barista wiping down tables and setting up chairs. A normal morning of a normal day. The phone vibrated. Read. I got the class schedule. I squeezed the phone tighter. And? They're actually teaching a class together. Piano duet 3 times a week. Something squeezed inside, so 3 times a week they were together. Officially, in full view of everyone. Thanks, Reed. Look, maybe it's not like that. Maybe I saw him at the hospital, heard them talking. A pause. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Audrey came into the kitchen, in her favorite robe, hair gathered in a careless bun. It was like nothing had changed, like we were still a happy couple. Good morning. Her voice sounded uncertain. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the cup. I'm going back to work today. Are you sure you're ready? Yeah, I feel a lot better. She poured herself a cup of coffee, added milk. 2 small sips, as always. For 5 years, I'd observed this ritual every morning. Now every movement she made caused a deafening pain. Are you having a duet today? I asked, trying to keep my voice sounding indifferent. The cup in her hands trembled. Yeah. With Keith? Milk spilled onto the countertop. Graham, please. Just a question. She wiped up the spilled milk with trembling hands. I've got to get ready. I watched her leave, hurriedly, almost running away. The phone vibrated in my pocket again. Vince. Meet you at the office? No, I'll work from home today. Graham, you can't hide forever. I'm not hiding. But it was a lie. I was hiding. From work, from friends, from reality. I'd barely left the house the last few days, canceled all my appointments. I couldn't bring myself to pretend everything was okay. Audrey packed quickly. I could hear her pacing the bedroom, opening a closet, dropping something. Usually, she was meticulous about picking out her clothes for work, but today she dressed in 10 minutes. I'm out, she called out from the hallway. The door slammed shut. I went to the window, saw her walking briskly to the bus stop. In her hands was a folder of sheet music, just like his. The phone vibrated again, a message from Reed. Go to the college website, concert poster. I opened the site. On the home page was the announcement of an upcoming concert. A piano duo, Audrey McAllister and Keith Donovan performing works by Schubert. Underneath the announcement is a photo. They are seated at the piano, leaning over the keys. Her hair almost touches his shoulder. They smile, not at the audience, at each other. I closed the laptop. My head was buzzing. 3 months. 3 months they'd been practicing together. 3 months she'd come home from those rehearsals, kissing me, telling me about her day. Vince called, Dude, did you see it? Yeah. Come to the office, you need a distraction. I can't. Graham, I need to know the truth, the whole truth. I opened the bedroom closet, her things, neatly hung dresses, stacks of blouses, the familiar smell of her perfume, in her coat pocket, a concert ticket. 3 weeks ago, A concert she never told me about. The phone vibrated again. Read. Found their old shows on YouTube. Have you watched them? Don't want to. Maybe it's really just work? I didn't answer. I opened her desk drawer. Papers, sheet music, concert programs. A picture of her at the piano, him standing next to her with his hand on her shoulder. The date on the back, 2 months ago. The house phone rang in the living room. The answering machine came on. Audrey, this is Lauren. Call me back, please. It's important. I sat in my chair looking out the window. Across the street at the coffee shop, the customers were changing. People came and went, living their normal lives. I sat in our apartment, which had become a museum of lies, trying to pick up the pieces of truth. Vince called again. I'm coming over. Don't. Yes, you do. You shouldn't be alone. 20 minutes later, he was here, with pizza and beer, just like old times. Did you find anything? I showed him the picture. He looked at it for a long time. Maybe it's just… What? A professional relationship? Did you see the way they look at each other? He sighed. What are you going to do? Wait for her to come back, have a talk. And say what? I shook my head. I don't know. I just want to hear the truth just once. The day stretched on endlessly. Vince and I tried to work. He'd brought in some papers that needed my attention, but I couldn't concentrate. Every sound from the stairs made me flinch. At 4, Reed called. They're rehearsing right now. Do you want me to… No, I'm not going to follow her. Graham, you have to do something. I know. Vince left in the evening, leaving the almost untouched pizza and warm beer. I sat in the dark, looking at the picture. Her smile, his hand on her shoulder. When had this started? How had I not noticed? At 10, the front door slammed. I heard her footsteps, the sound of keys being thrown. Graham? I'm here. She turned on the light, froze in the doorway. Why are you sitting in the dark? Thinking. About what? About you? About him? About your concert? She turned pale. What concert? I showed her the picture. She covered her mouth with her hand. Where did you find this? In your desk, next to the ticket for the concert you didn't tell me about. I was going to… When? After I saw it at the hospital? Or after I found that picture? She sank down on the couch, clutching the folder of notes in her hands. It's not what you think. What do I think, Audrey? That my wife is seeing another man? That she's lying to me? That everything I thought was real turned out to be fake? No, please, let me explain. But I wasn't listening anymore. I stood up, grabbed my jacket. I'm leaving. Where to? Anywhere. Away from here. I walked out, slamming the door shut. My phone vibrated in my pocket, probably Vince or Reed, or her, but I couldn't talk, couldn't listen to another lie. The night city buzzed around me. I walked, unable to see the road, trying to dull the pain in my chest with physical fatigue. Scraps of memories swirled in my head, her laughter, her kisses, her lies. The phone vibrated again, a message from an unknown number. Mr. McAllister, we need to talk. Keith. I stood in the middle of the street, staring at the screen. People were rushing around, cars were honking, life went on, and I could feel something inside finally breaking. I spent the night in the office, lying on the leather couch in the reception area. I couldn't sleep. The message from Keith was in front of my eyes, and Audrey's voice sounded in my ears. 23 missed calls overnight. Vince arrived in the morning, anxious, with a bag of fresh croissants and coffee. You look like a corpse, he said as he walked in. I looked in the hallway mirror. The wrinkled suit, the stubble, the red eyes. Really not a good look. Did you answer him? Vince handed me a cup of coffee. No. And to her? I shook my head. The phone vibrated again. The 24th missed call from Audrey. Graham, you have to talk to her. I know, but first… What? I opened my laptop, logged onto the college website. Today's class schedule read, 10 a.m., piano class, Professor K. Donovan. You're not going to… I am. Vince sighed heavily. I'm going with you. No. Yes, you're in no condition to be alone. I didn't argue. We made it to the college in 20 minutes. The old red brick building, covered in ivy, looked majestic in the morning light. How many times had I come here to pick up Audrey? How many times had I waited for her after class? In the parking lot, I recognized her car, and next to it, a silver BMW. His car? Probably. They must park next to each other a lot, maybe drive off together sometimes. Graham, Vince put a hand on my shoulder. Maybe we shouldn't. But I was already walking toward the entrance. The familiar guard nodded at me. He was used to seeing me here. I wonder what he thinks. Does he know? Third floor, piano class. From behind the door came the sound of music, Schubert, the duet from the concert program. I stopped, listening. The two instruments blended into a single melody, as if they were having an intimate conversation. Vince stood beside me, not saying a word. The music faded. There were voices, the laughter of students. The door opened, and a group of young men with sheet music came out of the classroom. And that's when I saw them. Audrey at the piano, him standing next to her, leaning toward her. They were talking about something, not noticing no one around them. His hand was resting on the back of her chair, a possessive gesture. I stepped into the classroom. Vince tried to hold me back, but it was too late. Audrey saw me first, pale, and jumped up from her chair. Keith straightened, his hand slipping off the back of his chair. Graham, didn't expect to see me here? The last students hurriedly slipped out of the classroom. Vince remained at the door, a silent support. Mr. McAllister, Keith stepped forward. I've been meaning to talk to you. About what? About you sleeping with my wife? Audrey flinched. Graham, please. No, let's talk. Let's finally tell the truth. I pulled out my phone, opened the picture. When did it start? After this concert or before? Keith turned pale. Listen. No, you listen. I know everything. I know about your meetings, about the messages, about... You don't understand. Audrey was almost shouting. It's not what you think. What am I supposed to think? That it's just rehearsals? That all these secret calls, texts are just work? Keith took a step toward me. Mr. McAllister, let's talk calmly. Calmly? My wife confessed to cheating in the hospital. I saw you come to see her, heard her talking to you, and you want me to be calm? Silence hung in the classroom. Only a piano was playing somewhere in the distance. Someone was practicing in a neighboring classroom. I love her, Keith said suddenly. Audrey turned sharply toward him. Keith, don't. Yes, you do. I love her, and she loves me. It was as if the world had stopped. I looked at my wife. She stood with her head down, tears rolling down her cheeks. Is it true? My voice sounded hoarse. She looked up. There was pain, guilt, and something else in her eyes. Something I'd never seen before. I'm sorry. Everything inside shivered. I took a step back, then another. Graham. She held out her hand. Don't touch me. Vince stepped forward. Come on, man. But I couldn't move from my seat. I watched them. She in her favorite blue dress, he in an elegant suit, the perfect couple, musicians, soulmates. You know, I said softly, but each word came hard. I took care of her after her surgery. I sat by her side at night. I was afraid for her. And you were just waiting for the moment. Keith lowered his eyes. We didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't? How did you think you were going to do that? Have an affair with my wife behind my back and hope I never find out? Stop it, Audrey shrieked. Don't say that. How am I supposed to say it? What do you call what you did? Footsteps were heard in the hallway. Someone was walking toward the classroom. Vince quickly closed the door. We were going to tell you, Audrey said through tears. After the concert. After the concert? The one I found a ticket for in your coat? She nodded. I couldn't find the words. But you found the words under anesthesia, didn't you? Keith stepped between us. Don't blame her. It was me. Oh, I don't blame you. I'm grateful. You showed me the truth, showed me what our lives were worth. I turned toward the door. Vince put a hand on my shoulder. Let's go. Graham, wait. Audrey rushed after me. But I was already walking down the hallway, not turning around. My ears were ringing and my eyes were blurring. Somewhere behind me, Vince was saying something. Audrey was crying, but I couldn't hear. It was sunny outside. Students were sitting on benches, some of them playing guitar. Just a normal day at the music college. "Where are you going?" Vince caught up with me by the car. "I don't know. Anywhere." "Let's go to my place." I shook my head. I need to be alone. "In this condition?" "Yes." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Call me if you need anything." I got into the car. I saw Audrey in the rearview mirror. She was standing in the entrance. Keith had his arm around her shoulders. They were looking at me. I started the engine. My phone vibrated again. A message from her. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I didn't answer. I got on the road, joined the traffic. Where to go? I can't go home. Everything reminds me of her. The office? No. I stopped at a bar, small, dark, where no one knows me. I ordered a whiskey. "Rough day?" the bartender asked, pouring. "Tough life." The phone kept vibrating. Audrey, Vince, Reed all wanted to say something. Comfort, explain. But what was there to explain? My wife loved someone else. Everything I believed was a lie. 5 years of my life had become a prelude to this moment. I took a sip. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Another text message. But I didn't bother to read it. Some messages are better left unread. Some truths are better not known until the end. I ordered another whiskey. It was going to be a long night ahead. The week passed like a blur. I'd been living in Vince's apartment, not answering the phone, not going to work. Reed was running the agency, canceling appointments, making excuses, and I just existed, sleeping on a friend's couch, staring at the ceiling, drinking. That morning, Vince woke me up earlier than usual. "Get up. Stop hiding." I struggled to open my eyes. My head was splitting after last night's whiskey. "What time is it?" 9. Time to get back to life. A fresh newspaper lay on the kitchen table. On the last page was the announcement of a concert at the music college. Piano duo, Audrey McAllister and Keith Donovan. Today. "Is that why you woke me up?" Vince put a cup of coffee in front of me. "You have to finish this, once and for all." "How?" "Go to a concert." I grinned. "To what? To see them happy?" "To close this chapter and move on." I looked at the picture in the paper, them sitting at the piano, smiling at each other. A professional shot, staged. But even through the newsprint, you could see their connection. "I'm coming with you," Vince said. "No." "Yes. I won't let you do anything stupid." I drank my coffee in silence. My mind was slowly clearing up. Maybe Vince was right. Maybe it was time to face the truth. Reed called, "Did you see the paper?" "Yeah." "What are you gonna do?" "Go. Take a look." "Do you want me to?" "No. Vince is coming with me." We arrived at the college an hour before the concert. People were already gathering at the entrance. Students, faculty, music lovers. I recognized some of the faces. How many times had I been here before, listening to Audrey perform? "Why don't we wait in the car?" Vince suggested, but I was already walking toward the entrance. Something was pulling me inside. Maybe a masochistic desire to see them together, maybe a need for final confirmation. The lobby was noisy. People were talking, laughing, leafing through programs. I picked one up, glossy paper, beautifully designed, their names next to each other, as always. "Graham?" I turned around. Lauren was standing a few feet away, pale, worried. "What are you doing here? What do you think?" She looked around nervously. "You shouldn't." "Why not? It's a public concert after all. Or are cuckolded husbands not allowed in?" "Graham, please." But I was already walking toward the concert hall. Vince followed, ready to intervene at any moment. The hall was slowly filling up. We sat in the last row far enough away to be unnoticed, close enough to see everything. "Are you sure?" Vince asked for the 100th time. I didn't answer. There were 2 pianos on the stage. Technicians were checking the lights, tuning the instruments. It was business as usual. I'd seen this preparation dozens of times. The hall fell silent. They came on stage. Audrey in an elegant black dress, Keith in an austere suit. They bowed to the audience. They sat down at their instruments. The first notes of Schubert filled the hall. I watched their hands move over the keys, exchanged glances, breathed in unison. It was more than music. It was a love story told through the notes. The music was escalating. I saw Audrey smile as she looked at Keith. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time, maybe never. Something inside me broke completely. I stood up. Graham, but I was already walking towards the stage. The music cut off. Audrey saw me first, her hands frozen over the keys. "Keep going," my voice echoed through the room. "Don't stop for me." A whisper rose in the hall. Keith stood up. "Mr. McAllister." No, play on. Tell everyone your love story." Audrey turned pale. "Graham, please." "What? You're embarrassed? But everyone already knows, don't they? The whole college knows." "Security!" someone shouted from the hall. Vince tried to pull me away. "Let's get out of here." You know what the funny thing is? I was sitting by her bedside in the hospital, holding her hand while she raved about her lover. Audrey covered her face with her hands. Keith stepped forward. "Stop it. You're drunk." "Oh, yes, I am drunk. Do you know why? Because my wife—" I didn't get a chance to finish. Keith's fist smashed into my face. I staggered, fell. There was screaming in the room. Vince and someone else dragged me away. I saw Audrey crying, Keith hugging her, students filming everything on their phones. "Call the police!" someone yelled. "Take him away!" I was being dragged toward the exit. I didn't resist. I didn't have the strength. My head was noisy, and I could taste blood in my mouth. It was cold outside. Vince put me in the car. "You're an idiot." "I know. Happy now?" I looked at my reflection in the mirror, a busted lip, a black eye starting to show. "Let's get out of here." Vince started the car. People were running out of the college. The concert must have been canceled. Some were pointing at our car, some were taking pictures. "You'll be all over the local news tomorrow." "I don't care." We drove in silence. The phone was ringing off the hook. Reed, Lauren, even my mother. Apparently news travels fast. "Where should I take you?" "Home." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Time to pack." The apartment greeted me with silence. Audrey hadn't been here in a week. She must have been staying with him. Her cup of dried coffee still stood on the kitchen table. I went into the bedroom, opened the closet, her things, her smell, her life, pulled out my suitcase, started folding my shirts, my suits. The phone rang. Audrey. I stared at the screen until the ringing stopped. After a minute, a message came through. "Why did you do that?" I didn't answer. I continued to put things away, mechanically, mindlessly. 5 years of my life fit into one suitcase. Vince stood in the doorway. "Why don't you stay at my place for a couple more days?" "No, I'll get a hotel room." "And then?" I closed my suitcase. Then we'll see." On the table by the bed was our wedding picture. I turned it face down, no more pretending it could be fixed. The phone rang again, this time Keith. "Don't answer it," Vince said. But I'd already pressed the button. "Yeah? Look, what you did." "What? Ruined your great debut?" "You embarrassed Audrey in front of the whole college." I laughed. "Isn't sleeping with another man's wife an embarrassment?" "I'm filing a police report for disorderly conduct." "Go ahead. I don't care anymore." I hung up. Vince looked at me anxiously. "What now?" "Now? Now it's over." I picked up my suitcase, taking one last look around the apartment, the walls that held our memories, the couch where we watched movies, the kitchen where we cooked together. It all belonged to the past now. "Let's go," I said. Vince took my suitcase. I locked the door, leaving my keys in the mailbox. There was nothing more for me to do here. In the car, the phone vibrated again. A message from Audrey. "I'm filing for divorce." I deleted the message without replying. Some things don't require a response. We were driving through the city at night. In the rearview mirror, I saw my reflection. A broken face, empty eyes. a man who had lost everything. 3 weeks later, I stood in the middle of an empty apartment. The bare walls where photos used to hang left light rectangles, traces of a past life. Footsteps rumbled in the kitchen, the unfurnished space seeming huge and alien. Vince set the last box down on the floor. "I think that's it." I nodded, looking at the scratches on the parquet floor. It was where our couch had been, where we'd spent our evenings. Now it, like most of the furniture, had been sold. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from the realtor. "Buyers will be here in an hour." Funny how life makes circles. I met Audrey while selling her condo. Now I'm selling our shared one, or rather already mine, to start over. "Are you sure you want to sell?" Vince took a seat on the windowsill. "What are we going to do with it? Leave it as a museum of unfulfilled hopes?" It was raining lightly outside the window. The lights were still on in the coffee shop across the street. Only I no longer brewed coffee in the morning, no longer waited for Audrey to emerge from the bedroom in her favorite robe. The divorce was quick and quiet. She didn't ask for anything, just her belongings and tools. I signed all the papers without reading them. What did it matter what it said? The main thing was already lost. Reed called, "How are you?" "I'm fine." "Did you hear the news?" "What news?" Pause. "She quit college. She and Keith are moving to Boston." Something prickled in my chest. Boston, the conservatory, a new life without me, without memories, without guilt. "Graham?" "Yeah, I heard." "Do you want me to come over?" "No, Vince is here." I walked over to the window. In the coffee shop across the street, a barista was wiping down tables, just like the morning I'd waited for Audrey to return from the hospital. It seemed like it was in another life. Her hairpin, small, silver with a pearl, was left on the windowsill. She often forgot them around the apartment. I used to collect them, take them to the bedroom. Now I just tossed it in the trash box. "What are you thinking?" Vince asked. "About how things have changed. 3 weeks ago, I was a successful realtor with my own agency, a happy husband, a man with plans for the future. Now a divorced loser with a college scandal, living in a friend's apartment." The phone vibrated again. His mother, "Why don't you come over for the weekend?" "Not right now," I texted back. How do I explain to my parents that their favorite daughter-in-law, that wonderful girl, turned out to be a liar? How do I tell them about the betrayal, the pain, the emptiness inside? The doorbell rang. The realtor had arrived early. "Hello, Mr. McAllister? Ready to show the apartment?" I nodded. A young couple, just like Audrey and me 5 years ago. They walked around the rooms, discussing where they would put the furniture, what curtains they would hang, making plans, dreaming. "What's this?" The girl pointed to a piano mark on the parquet. "A musical instrument used to stand here," the realtor replied. "But the acoustics are great, aren't they?" I stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had intensified. Downstairs, people with umbrellas hurried by. Cars honked. The city lived its own life, oblivious to other people's grief. Vince followed. "Why don't you stay with me a little longer?" "No, I'm leaving tomorrow." "Where to?" "Seattle. The agency's opening a branch there." Actually, it was an excuse. Just needed to get away. Away from this city, from the memories, from the possibility of accidentally meeting them on the street. The couple left, leaving a deposit. The realtor shook my hand. "Congratulations on a good deal." A good deal. I used to say those words to clients myself. Now they sounded like mockery. "Let's go get a drink?" Vince suggested. "No, we need to finish up here." There were a few boxes left. Books, papers, some little things. I found her old notebook of music. She must have forgotten it when she picked up her stuff. She had written some notes in the margins in her handwriting. I turned the page and found the program for the concert where it all began. Their names next to each other, the date, the repertoire, the beginning of the end. The phone rang, an unknown number. I knew it was her. I knew I had to answer it, to listen to the last words, to say goodbye in a human way. But I just watched the screen go out. Some conversations are better left unsaid. Some goodbyes are better left unspoken. "Last box." Vince said. I looked around the apartment, empty rooms filled with ghosts of the past. This is where we were happy. This is where it all ended. On the kitchen windowsill was her flower, a small cactus she hadn't taken away for some reason. It was still reaching for the light, unaware that its mistress was not coming back. Will you leave the keys with the concierge? Vince asked. Yes. Have him give them to the new owners. We went downstairs. I looked at the windows one last time. How many times had I come back here? Seen the light in these windows? Known I was welcome? You know, Vince said as we walked to the car. It'll get better. I didn't answer. How do you explain that some things don't work out? That sometimes you can only learn to live with the emptiness inside? I got in the car, casting one last look at the house. Somewhere out there in Boston, Audrey is starting a new life. With a man who understands her music, shares her passion. And me? I'm just moving on. No music, no love, no illusions. Maybe that's what true adulthood is all about. The ability to let go, even when my heart is being torn apart. Ready? Vince asked. Yeah, let's go. The car touched down. In the rearview mirror, I watched the house disappear. The windows of our, now estranged, apartment dissolving in the rain.